Justin, thanks for being with me, man. Good to talk with you.
Todd, good to be here. Thanks, man. It's a privilege and an honor.
Yes, very excited about this conversation. Excited to dive into just really culture, what culture is, and hardwiring. This whole concept of how we're wired, and a lot of what we do at our company is just helping identify what these different cultures are of these churches and organizations, and then identifying the right culture fit on the candidate side. And one reason why I'm excited about this call is because me and you connected a few years back, and you introduced me to a tool that I know we'll talk a little bit about later on in this conversation. But it's one that's really helped our company identify culture fit and identify the culture of a place. And so that's so key, and that's a big emphasis about what we do too. But maybe for those who don't know you, Justin, maybe just introduce yourself and what you do and some of those things.
Well, thanks, Todd, for that. I appreciate it. Most important thing about me is my name's written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. So I'm set free by the power of the gospel. Heart's been changed by Christ. That's especially important because I grew up in a atheistic home where I'm probably the last person you would ever expect to be having a conversation like this, especially as it relates to just God's work in my life. So I'm a husband. I'm celebrating 30 years in a week, married to my wife, and I have five amazing children. Joy of my heart. All my joys and fears are bundled up in them. I have the privilege of pastoring a church called Desert Bible Church out here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I was doing the math. I actually, at the time we're recording this, there's about 9 different organizations that I'm over. So I think a lot about organizational leadership and structure. Everything from Hardwired Coaching, which is my favorite outside of ministry company where we use this tool, the CVI, to work with literally military, 4-star generals, law enforcement. We work with sports teams, schools, corporations. Everywhere people go, we go. We end up in some of the most unbelievable places working with some of the most incredible leaders in the world. And it's just a joy to be able to serve them. So recently I added, I'm the executive director of an organization called Not in Our City, which combats human trafficking as an anti-trafficking initiative that pulls churches primarily, but politicians, lawmakers, everybody together on this cause to push against that very insidious form of darkness. And so I'm thrilled at what I get to do. I really don't deserve any bit of it. And can't take credit for any of it. But I've learned a few things in the process that God has taught me, and I'm just thrilled to be able to share some of those things. But to your point, this conversation about culture really does come to the forefront always, and part of that is because when you're working with an organization, if there's something unethical, criminal, or immoral, you kind of know what to do about it. It's really not a question; it's very cut and dry. If it's something theological, you usually have those things laid out in advance. But there's this kind of thing in the middle that gets undefined and it's a little bit blurry and it hinders things. It makes things harder than they need to be. And people that's like, how do I work with you and how do we move forward and what's kind of stuck? It's intangible. Well, we bring clarity to that intangible. So culture really is one of the most important points of conversation in all the organizations that I lead, and even what as a leader I set very intentionally. Whatever I create or tolerate, I'm responsible for, and oftentimes that comes down to culture. So this is one of those conversations that has my full attention. I'm still a learner, I'll tell you that. And I'm still guilty of things where I feel like I should maybe know that by now or treat that differently by now, but still so ingrained into who I am are things that I bring to the culture, and that's true for everybody on my teams. So this is the right conversation, I think, to be having.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think too in a, a post-COVID world, if I could still say that term, culture seems to only be emphasized even more and all that more important because I think, people started um, just getting more in tune of, rather than this is the way that we've always done it. Oh, well, let me think about that different. Or, oh, what is our why? I found a lot of churches started asking that a lot more, when COVID hit. And I think that ultimately manifested itself in really them trying to figure out like assessing our culture, like what is our culture? And what kind of culture do we want to have moving forward? Maybe we had a culture before, then now is the time to change. And so, to your point, I think it's a very timely discussion. And I know this whole concept of culture is a big part of what you do, and it's a big part of what we do. It's why our tagline is precisely, because we're trying to assess what is your precise culture and who's going to be your precise fit and a precise cultural match. So, really excited for this. I mean, just starting from, kind of a 30,000-foot view, we hear this word culture a lot. We hear it tossed around a lot. Like, what is culture and how is it different than mission or vision? Maybe just unpack
Yeah,
that.
that's a great question. I think it's one of those words that we use, but we don't define very well. Most of the times when it comes up, you'll hear somebody say, "Oh, we have a very toxic culture." Where things are just kind of falling apart, or we really want to have a healthy culture, or we want to be kind of trendy and unique and different than everybody else. I actually have done some deep digging on this question itself, even prior to today. The general kind of definition of culture is what separates a group of people from another. That's the attitudes they have, the customs that they follow, the beliefs. If you go all the way back to the origin of cultures, you ultimately find yourself at the Tower of Babel when God split people from each other, and there were certain distinctive qualities that they all had, and there were certain symbols in their ethnicity that were unique one from the other. So it really kind of boils down to this set of shared values and goals and practices. But I don't know if you knew this, but this was a surprise to me. Did you know the word culture actually originates, if you go all the way back to its root, from the same term from which we get our word agriculture? That's interesting. It's agriculture. And by that, the picture is the soil in which everything planted grows. So it really is at the foundation or at the root of an organization. So you have a difference between fruit and root, what we might say, but who we really are. And that's where I get really into the thick of it, because there's a certain level, and everybody understands agriculture, right? Everybody understands whatever you put into the soil. Is ultimately going to be what comes up. If there's something that is wrong in the soil, or you plant the wrong thing in the soil, I mean, there's weeds in the soil, right? Even Jesus used, just to push this analogy further, because we understand this, when he talked about the different kinds of soils in Matthew chapter 13, you see the exact same thing as a diagnostic, not only in the church but in organizations. He talked about the hard soil, and nothing penetrated and nothing got through because of neglect. All you have to do is nothing, and just the neglect will allow the topsoil to crust, and you could throw seeds, the best seeds that would produce the best fruit, on top of that, and you're just feeding the birds. It's like throwing seeds on a sidewalk. It's just not going to get through. And so this is where things in an organization are just painfully hard. Why is this so hard?
Yeah.
Why is it that nothing we do works? Why is it that we spend all this energy and we don't get any fruit? And you see that organizations over a time, they've neglected the soil. You also have, you remember in Jesus's words, you had the weedy soil. Remember all the soil that was, infected by the other weeds that were in the soil. So
Right.
what happens is the crop grows, and the weeds grow faster, and they steal the sunlight, and they rob the true plant of the rich nutrients it needs to grow. And so it starts to grow, but then it withers. And then you have the rocky soil, where it looks good on the surface. This is probably the most dangerous one, and this is the one I think most interesting for our conversation potentially today. Is everything on the surface looks good. And if you were a farmer and you plunged your finger into the topsoil, it would be soft, it would be lush, and you would think, man, we're going to have a phenomenal crop. But because the energy of that root goes down deep and it hits limestone or bedrock and it can't penetrate, all the energy that's supposed to go down into what's healthy springs up into something that actually looks really good. But when pressure comes and when difficulty arises, or when the sun comes out, to use Jesus's analogy, and Jesus was using it as a metaphor for salvation, let's be clear about that. But all of a sudden now, because there was no firm root in it, it died. And so, the concept of culture is really the soil out of which all of our attitudes and behaviors and even our personality emerges. What we want is the good soil. What we want is where it's fruitful long term, where the penetration is deep, the work is simple, the people in our organization are productive, and the results are very, very rewarding. Now, you asked the question, how does that differ from vision, or mission? Mission is just, here's why we're here. And for us, we exist in the Great Commission. Our mission is to make disciples. It's clear. The vision is, what does that look like in our context? And what would our lives look like if personally we gave ourselves to our mission in this place? What resources would we use? What people would help us? All the particulars of how that mission is expressed here. That's vision. But here's what I think everybody who's been in leadership for any length of time knows: culture will eat your vision for breakfast.
That's right.
It will devour you. If you have a clear vision, but the appearances are deceiving, and fruitfulness is short-lived, and the results are incomplete, and the turnover is high, well, that means you're in rocky soil. If there's always these needless obstacles where you're chasing after one distraction after another, like like a farmer trying to always pull up the weeds, or you take a blowtorch, a flamethrower, or just round up to the whole thing, well, everybody's interfering with everybody else. Everybody's energies are drained, outcomes are delayed, and eventually the culture becomes so bad, you just have to wipe it clean with a whole new leadership, and who changes the culture. And of course, if it's hard and nothing penetrates and work is impossible and people are closed off from each other and policies are rigid and nothing grows at all, well, you can have vision all day long, but the end of the day, you're not doing a thing. There is no fruit. So when I hear culture, I hear fruitfulness, Todd. When I hear culture, I think of what's in the soil, and we have to plant. Well, first we have to cultivate it, and then we have to plant, and we have to water it, and we have to wait for it to grow, and then we bear a harvest. And that's really what we're all after. But it's most helpful to understand culture in terms of agriculture, and that becomes a diagnostic then that you can use to evaluate the health of any organization,
Man, that's a whole sermon in and of itself
right?
too that you can unpack. Yeah, I think of the mission and the vision of a place as that's your why and that's your what. What are you
Hmm.
doing? Why are you doing it? And I look at
Hmm.
culture, how you're gonna get there. Like,
Hmm.
what kind of organization are we gonna have that helps us fulfill our mission? And sometimes, like you're saying, that gets in the way and it doesn't help you fulfill it. But, hearing you talk about the hard soil and the rocks, like if I'm a pastor listening to this and I'm like, man, is that our organization or is that our staff? What would you say to leaders if they're trying to maybe take a step back and assess their
Hmm.
own culture? Like
Hmm.
how can they do that in a way that is purely objective and not biased and maybe some parts are going to be a hard pill to swallow, like, what would you say to leaders who are like, "Well, man, how do I figure out what kind of culture I have?"
Yeah, I have a rubric that I've used at the highest level of our nation's military on this very point. But here are some general categories that might be helpful. Think of a sliding scale, like to assess yourself against a rubric like this. Like, so here's some examples. What is the level of trust in the organization? A healthy organization has good trust between the people versus trust that's broken. Expectations, are they realistic or are they unfair? How is communication? Is it clear or is it confusing? When people look at their role, do they see themselves as stewards, or are they deeply possessive? When it comes to a sacrifice to make, are they selfish, or are they willing to give themselves away so that all flourish, all ships rise? Is honor free flowing or is it stingy? Does conflict, because conflict happens in an organization, do we have a plan to step towards it? We sometimes will say in a culture of grace, right? We're trying to steward those thoughts. Or does conflict always escalate and like those weeds pop up? Are leaders freeing or are they authoritarian? Meetings, boy, this is one of the biggest acid tests for your culture. Are they productive or are they colossal waste of time? Um, Results, adequate or excellent? Do we do the bare minimum or are altogether best? Accountability, do we say, hey, listen, I'm stuck or I need help or I dropped the ball, and or do we avoid that while we pretend by keeping everybody pacified that everything is okay? Attitudes, are we complaining or are we joyful? Are we unified? Is work a pleasure or a chore? Those are some of the benchmarks that are kind of universally recognized to say, do I have a healthy culture or do I have a toxic culture?
Right. I mean, that's an amazing list. I might need you to email me all those because
Sure.
that is a great, 7 or 8 topics there that I think would be great headers to evaluate culture. In that you talked about conflict, you talked about, tensions and accountability. And, I work with a lot of pastors, and I work with a lot of pastors who are really discouraged,
Hmm.
or, and you do as well. But for whatever reason, but sometimes they're dealing with 1 or 2 issues in the church or the organization that have been taking so much of their emotional energy and time and the conflict involved that they start to get so discouraged about themselves of this is an indication that I have a bad culture or I have, there's something wrong that I'm massively doing wrong here. And, I try to help them see zoom out a little bit more. Let's look at the full picture though. But I was just teaching a workshop recently where I was talking about conflict. And I think sometimes what I'm getting at is churches or pastors can ask when they're evaluating their culture is, did we avoid any conflict? Did we have much conflict? And I think to your point, that's the wrong question. I think the better question is, how do we handle conflict when
Yes.
it rises? And and the other thing is, after conflict happens, I think a good indicator I would add to your list is, does trust increase or decrease after conflict? And I think that's a really good indicator of culture as well.
Mm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, you're gonna say something?
Well, I would agree, and I would say to those pastors, because I am one, and if you'd have told me this early on in ministry, I probably would have maybe scoffed at it, but experience has taught me that it's true. I am, as the leader of the organization, the chief cultural officer, because I'm a steward of the soil, and what I allow to be planted, what I choose to water or neglect, that's ultimately on me. So not to make the burden worse for the pastor, but also to say this isn't something that I can avoid. It's not something that I can pass on to somebody else. As I said at the beginning, whatever I create or tolerate, I'm responsible for. And look, I'm a guy that's like, hey, listen, I want to love the Lord. I want you to love the Lord. I want us to grow. Can we have some common fundamentals that we are anchored by, that we just say we're gonna love each other, like of course you affirm all those things, right? But when you get into the actual work of the ministry, and again, because it's not this level of theological or moral, yeah, those are clearer cut. The cultural thing is harder, because you don't always see the effects of it until it's out of the ground. Going back to the fruit analogy, like when you're putting it into the ground, that's where the problem is. It originates there. Whatever you're planting and whatever you do with what's planted, but we usually react to it when it's already fully grown. And usually we're discouraged because we're wondering, how did this happen and how did I not see it, and what's going on? So trying to get ahead of it becomes, the goal. And I find that I'm really encouraged, and most organizations, including churches I work with, when they can see kind of on the front end who I have and how they contribute to culture, I'll know, I can tell you very quickly, starting with the senior leader all the way down, what kind of culture you'll have. This is part of why I'm so intrigued by the tool that I've been using for the last decade, the CVI, because it's really a helpful way to go, I know what I'm going to get for this person. I know what their positive contribution is going to be. I also know what the dark side's going to be. And I'll tell you something, Todd, that I've found that took me kind of a while to understand it, but I feel like this will save you and our listeners maybe a couple of decades. The number one thing that brings damage to culture, fear. Fear. A culture of fear ultimately produces every other kind of bad fruit. And fear is an expression of pride at the old, we're not talking about the good fear, the gift of fear. We're talking about the one Jesus commanded us not to have kind of fear. But Psalm 37 verse 8, do not fret, which is the visible form of fear. It only leads to evil doing. So if you have anxiety, if you have tension straining, if you have the subtle forms of fear or the more outward expressions of fear, people will manifest fear in a variety of different ways. And what they'll take that they can contribute positively to an organization, they will withhold or weaponize in a way that everybody begins to suffer. And so what I find is that you can't separate who you are from what you do. And that when you bring somebody, think of me as the senior leader of my organization, I will, by how I lead, have a certain kind of default that will allow this organization to experience a certain kind of culture. And there's certain things I need to know in advance I want to see present in my culture, but my default is to bring a certain level of contribution that will set a certain tone. And if I'm afraid or if I'm dark, as we like to say, there will be something wrong with the culture where people will begin to tuck away and hide. They'll start avoiding their mistakes. They'll start siloing up with other people, kind of thinking of the short term gain while they figure out their long term plan. And that's what we mean by culture. And so there's a whole conversation to be had about what those unique factors are, but they come built into us as people. And so you can't have an organization with people without a culture focus and a careful, watchful eye on what that has to be and what uniquely I do to shape it.
Yeah. Well, I love you already said it, culture is what you allow and what you tolerate. I always say culture is what you celebrate and what you tolerate, right? And
Mm,
so I think the
that's good.
unavoidable truth is that uh, every leader is building a culture. Like, it's not something that's over here that if I just don't touch it, I don't have to worry about it or, I don't even have to dive into that. It's like if you take that approach, you're gonna build a certain type of culture intentionally or unintentionally. And so when I hear about you talking about, the senior leader and how that person is gonna be inevitably how the culture is, right? They're the chief culture officer. Um, let's say there's, they might be unintentionally building a culture of fear or different aspects that they may be unintentionally causing in the culture. How do you balance a person's wiring um and them being authentic to who they are, but also being cognizant of maybe some of the downsides of what that authenticity can bring, barring obviously if we're talking about a clear line of like, no, that's just sin. Like, I'm not
Right.
not talking about those things, but I because I could hear certain people saying, well, I don't mean to cause fear. I'm more intense or I'm more, direct and I'm not trying. Like, how can they balance that authenticity piece with things that might need to be tweaked that they can still stay true to who they are, but maybe a better version of themselves, or if that makes
Yeah. I think there's a short answer and I think there's a more involved answer, more nuanced answer. Let me give you the short answer first. And I will say this is probably the single greatest piece of focus or MO for me as a leader. And I think the thing that ultimately at the end of the day is the key to a great leader, an elite leader versus somebody who just does what they're told in tasks. And that's the ability to answer one question. What does the moment call for?
sense.
The most mature leader can answer that question. What moment are we in? And see, the reason that that's nuanced is because By default, when I show up, I'm going to bring me. And whatever it is that I bring is what, however ominous and however weighty and whatever position I hold, I'm going to bring me. So that just by walking into the room is going to have an effect. But I have to know, do I need to lean into who I am and what I bring because that's what the moment calls for? Or do I need to suppress and subordinate that tendency to just be me? Because everybody's going to do that, by the way. Everybody's going to show up. If you invite them, they're going to bring themselves. They can't separate them from what they do. So they're going to show up and they're going to bring who they are. And that's going to composite, determine and dictate the energy in the room and where things go. And the more you have of a certain kind of person with a certain kind of hardwiring, the more dominant and ominous that's going to be. But still, if I can ask the question, what does the moment call for? I either step up and lead because that's my moment, or I stand down and make room for the person whose moment it is because that's what's needed here. Rather than just say, here I am, I'm the most dominant voice, I get the biggest paycheck and have the coolest office and the most senior title. So therefore, we're going to do what I say. No, that's not it. Let me give you an example of this. People who tend to be in the highest levels of executive leadership, they tend to be people who create a culture of simplicity, clarity, and urgency. We've lived this. Um, there's simplicity. Let's remove everything extraneous so that we have an understanding of what we're going for. That drives clarity so that we know how to communicate. And if we know what we're doing and where we're going, then why aren't we doing it? There's urgency. But see what that does positively for the culture is it gives the movement momentum. And it creates a culture of excitement because things are actually happening and we're getting impressive results. People want to be on the winning side. They want to see more people there. Well, they want to see more dollars coming in. They want to see more tangible impact out there. And so the cause now is contagious and it's thrilling because what we envisioned, you talk about vision, is actually materializing. And think about this, when you have that kind of leader who's decisive and actionable and who can go and stimulate this, people in the organization, they move from spectating to activating, and everybody's doing the work with great energy.
Right.
But when there's a dark expression of that, the culture becomes one of instability and insecurity because that level of decisiveness and intensity and momentum is a power. But when someone is insecure and fear based, they're afraid of losing the results. They're afraid of losing momentum. They're afraid. And all of a sudden, what happens? Fear. Fear enters in. And now we have to pretend to be powerful. We have to try to drum up excitement where there's not actually anything happening. And we put on people this pressure to perform. And when that doesn't happen at the speed or with the results that we want, that leader will double down and force an agenda all the more until the results come. So now the culture becomes one where people are starting to overpower each other. Conflict is open war. It's a turf war. People get competitive and everybody else figures out, where do I scatter and hide, where I look for somebody that I can trust. Well, all you have to do is show up dark and be a very decisive leader on a very bad day and let fear rule you, and the culture has just shifted from one to the other. So I think it does matter, number one, as a leader, am I leading myself? Because if I'm not leading myself, I can't lead others and I can't lead an organization. And how many times, Todd, have you and I seen situations or coached in situations where the fallout has been somebody who was an insecure leader who was afraid and thought they were in control, but clearly couldn't control themselves, created this intimidating space where everybody is now afraid. And so they're beginning to weaponize in their own place or withhold what they bring. And the domino effect or the ripple effect of
Mm.
toxic culture spreads across the entire organization. So it matters that I'm watchful over myself. And it matters that I read what the moment calls for, because if I can answer that question, then I can bring the person, if it's me, me. If it's not me, I haven't stopped being a leader by bringing the person who we need most to offer what this phase of whatever workflow we're in actually calls for.
Yeah. I love that, and that's why your tool is so helpful, which I love to dive into here in a second. But what I love about what your tool does, the tool that we use is, the higher the score you are, the higher the builder or the higher the merchant,
Yeah.
uh, you also proportionately can go the opposite way that far as well.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things where your strengths, kind of become your weaknesses if you're not in a healthy place. But,
100%.
kind of moving down from the macro organizational culture into kind of this more individual, how am I wired? I mean, that's the name of your organization, right? Hardwired
Right. Yeah.
Coaching. Um, Before we dive into that, like, just what does hardwiring mean? Like,
Yeah. Great
yeah,
questions. Yeah. When we talk about hardwiring, it's maybe helpful to say also what it's not. So we're not talking about personality. Personality classically defined. You ready for this? It's the view of me I have of me as it interacts with the view of me that I think you have of me. Did you catch that?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
In other words, I could project onto you what I think you want me to be, but I could be deceiving you or self-deceived. I could wish I was something that I'm not, but I see in somebody else that I imitate poorly. And with imposter syndrome, try to make people convinced that I am that and fake it till I make it until I learn some skills that actually get me, some traction. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about when we say hardwiring, we're not talking about spiritual gifts. We're not talking about IQ, EQ. What we're essentially saying is, who are you at the core of your being? Or, as we'll use in our context and the analogy here, what are you in your soil? What's the unchanging part of you? Going back to soil, I could plant beans in a field one year and I can plant corn in the same field in another year. The soil doesn't change. That's who we're talking about. We're talking about your unchanging nature. Or to say it differently, we describe it in terms of capacity. What's the amount and kind of energy that you bring to a given moment, and when do you run out? And how does that look as it relates to what we entrust to you? So I love to use the analogy of a thumbtack versus an anchor bolt. I just bought an 85-inch screen TV for my new office. I'm going to hang that on brackets with about 8 anchor bolts into my drywall where the studs are, even though the TV is only 65 pounds. I'm going to use each anchor bolt is 106 pounds. I'm going to use 8 of those. So I got like 864 pounds worth of capacity to hold a 65-pound TV. Why? Because I don't want to drop it. It'll hold. That's what capacity is. It has the capacity to hold. A thumbtack, no chance. No chance. Scotch tape, sorry, doesn't have the capacity. And if I have, let's apply this to leadership. If I have in my organization somebody that's really mature and really godly and's been faithful for 15 years as a thumbtack holding posters and business cards on corkboards, and they say, "Ooh, I would love the opportunity to hold the TV," you would say, "No, it's not the most loving thing to set you up to fail by putting something on you that you don't have the capacity to hold." And if the thumbtack says, "But wait a minute, I've been on time every day and I've never dropped a business card," you would say, "But you just don't have the capacity for this amount of responsibility." And see, if I take that TV, and this is where a lot of organizations struggle, and I hang it on a thumbtack and it drops to the ground and breaks into pieces, I can't say, "Stupid thumbtack, what's wrong with you?" Nor can the thumbtack say, "But that's okay. I got a buddy named Scotch tape and duct tape and my friend putty and glue. They're all going to join my team and help me hold the TV." You're like, "No." And 1,000 thumbtacks wouldn't hold it either because it doesn't have the capacity. When we talk about hardwiring, we mean who you are at the core of your being, the part of you that you can't fake. So there's tools out there like a strengths finders that'll measure your skills and strengths. There's tools out there like Myers-Briggs or DISC that'll be either sort of predictive behavioral or personality. We're going really after who are you and the part that's unchanging. And as you know, Todd, one of the great things that the CVI has it's had since it was created is a 97.7% repeat score reliability, which means that if you take it now, next year, or when you're 85, your results only have a 2.3% chance of changing at all. You're going to be that much, 97.7% the same. So we're really measuring the part of you that's the real you. you get married, you have kids, you get a health scare, you move geographically. There's a lot of times that we change. Lots of things about us change. We're going after the part of you that doesn't change. But here's how it fits our conversation about culture. No matter what, I am going to bring that with me everywhere I go.
Right,
I can't ultimately suppress it like a beach ball underwater. It's going to pop back up.
right.
I can subordinate it in the moment because I'm making room for somebody else because it doesn't call for me to just be me. But at the end of the day, I am who I am. And God has made me uniquely with this capacity to be used for his glory and for the good of others. So my goal is to find what is my highest and best and to give myself away to that. And then to make room for the other people in my life, in the organization, ultimately who will cause us to flourish. And when that flourishes well, we call that a healthy culture. When that doesn't flourish well, we call it a toxic culture, which means, and this is what the cool part is, we can tell you in advance when we look at your organization's team map what kind of culture you have and what its prospect of being healthy is and what it's like when it's toxic. And so that's the beauty of kind of knowing what's in your soil is how it's going to affect what grows out of it.
Yeah, well, we talk to candidates all the time who are, dissatisfied in their job, or they can't figure out why do they have this
Totally.
them of, "Man, it just something just doesn't feel right." I think it a lot of times is because there's a certain capacity that they're being asked to fulfill, and they're a thumbtack asked to hold a TV, like you're saying. And that's why I love what this tool kinda quantifies to a degree, of what those things are. I'd love for you, just for our listeners, to maybe give an overview of the CBI, where we're starting to use link now that it's kinda getting into the CBI and capacity and things, like, just maybe go over a quick snapshot. Feel free to share your screen and just give
Yeah.
a little overview of what these capacities are that everybody has.
Yeah, for sure. Can you see it on the screen here?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so these are my results out of a risk of not exposing anybody else. I'll just put mine up on the screen, and you'll see a composite of four different core values. And we say core values. This is who you are at your core, and we say value not like, oh, I value honesty, I value authenticity. What we're saying is these are your drivers. This is the size of the energy scale that you bring, and you're going to see four words up here that they aren't the core value, but they're meant to give you a mental picture of somebody in history who embodied them. So, for example, starting with my largest merchant, don't think sales guy. Actually, in the ancient world, merchants were the people who brought communities together. They actually, you asked about vision earlier. Merchants are your visionaries. These are the people who, when they brought people together in the marketplace, because you had two places in the ancient world, your home and the marketplace. And that's not where you squeezed fruit. That was the place where you exchanged ideas. That's why the Apostle Paul, when he would go to a city, he'd go to the synagogue first and then he'd go to the marketplace because that's where people were talking. That's where ideas were forming. And that's where trust was built. That's where vision of what we could do together that none of us could do by ourselves created a clear mental picture in people's minds that this is what our lives would look like. And then people, get this, would emotionally commit to something intangible that didn't even exist yet because they were so clear in their mind about where they were going and what they were going to accomplish. And everybody began to say, I'll volunteer for this, I'll take this, because the vision of where we were going and the trust between the people who were part of that collaborative process made all of us go hard with a commitment and fierce loyalty until it was a reality. If you go down on the second one here, innovator, don't think inventor, think problem solver. And I'm going in this order primarily because this is the recommended workflow that also is one of the reasons why organizations' culture begin to, without even realizing it, collide. But an innovator is somebody who can see things the way they really are with wisdom. Different than the love of the merchant who says, we're going to do what's best in the interest of all. The innovator goes, wait a minute. There's a strategy to accomplishing that vision that if we can remove these obstacles and we could create this roadmap, we could actually see the vision happen. This and this and this are in the way. So innovators see things the way they really are. They figure out what to do about it, and they come up with solutions to problems. They create smoothness where there was friction. They bring simplicity where there was complexity, and they find holes and gaps and they close and fill them. And so innovators have this amazing ability to just be level headed in chaos and see problems and go, there is a way forward, because their minds don't work from start to finish. Their minds work from finish to start. We walk in our minds in a path that then we can take with our feet towards a goal that is the most excellent and straightforward path from point A to point B. That's a strategy. So you have vision, where are we going? Strategy, how do we get there? And then I'm kind of embarrassed to show you all my white space here. In the banker, this is structure. Now, people, when they hear the word banker, they think of US Bank or Wells Fargo or something like that. That's not at all what we mean. People have almost universally heard of banking knowledge. It's this ability, practically speaking, to collect and protect data. And the data of what is tells us the way things should be. So we have a very true developed sense of what's right versus what's wrong, things that are true versus what's false. Truth is true because it's true, and knowledge doesn't lie. So there's this assurance that allows us to take, with great stability and faithfulness, measured steps forward to accomplish what we envisioned before. So whereas the vision was very, very intangible and yet exciting, we've got a strategy for now how we're going to get there. The structure actually gives us the tools that we'll need for the journey. Time, how long is it going to take? Benchmarks or schedules with benchmarks of fulfillment on the timeline. People, who exactly is going to do what task? Who's going to do tasks? Who has spheres of responsibility? Who makes decisions with authority? And who's ultimately accountable at the ownership level? Money, how much is this going to cost, and how do we make sure we don't run out? And then physical hard assets. Those people tend to be so faithful in their stewardship of the resources we need, so that as we plan out where we're going in terms of vision, the strategy of what we're going to take to get there, the structure of what resources would be applied to that strategic plan. Now you come to the last phase, the builder, who takes action. And the builder, don't think hammer and hard hat. Think of somebody who has the ability to decide and do. They take action and they get results. And they have this amazing ability, as we were saying even before, to generate momentum and to build this actionable results, where not only do we get the results that are impressive, but the momentum we create, we can allow to enlarge upon what we're doing so that we can get more results. So to follow this workflow: vision, strategy, structure, and action. You know what happens though to me, Todd, is I show up and I start with vision, but then I want to go immediately to action. Vision, action, vision, action. I skip over the strategy. I'm like, nah, not a big deal. Or let's smash it and paint over it. And the structure, somebody's paying attention to that, right? I tend to skip steps. Everybody who comes to any project, any initiative, or any meeting will immediately default to their most dominant hardwiring. So imagine a meeting then where I'm coming in trying to create great excitement around a vision, and somebody says, we've never done that before, or we tried that once and it failed.
Right.
Or the last guy who we had to get rid of had your same idea. It's not going to work. Or who's going to pay for that? And what they've done is killed the vision. And so now what happens is the merchant has this pouty rather than life-giving, loving vision, because he's got broken trust with the person who thinks his idea stinks, because it's not tangible, it's not practical, it'll never work. And this person's got all the resources, and they're going, I'm not going to give you any resources to do your job. And so the vision's never going to get off the ground. We're going to kill it before it starts. And this person's firing all the problems of what could be, rather than creating a removal of those problems to actually achieve it. And this person's going, when you guys figure out what you're doing, call me, because I'm going to be over here working on something else. And you can see how each of these core values, if not appropriately honored,
Right.
will create a deep level of mismatch to the project. And if we don't even have a clear cadence of the way we're going, if this person wants to start with action and this person wants to start with the problems, and this person wants to say, well, here's how much we've got approved, and this person says, what if we, everybody's got a different starting point, so nobody gets to the end. So let me just kind of bring it around and simplify what I'm trying to say. Not only does a tool like this give you the ability to know who you have and what they contribute, it can tell you what they bring to the culture positively and also what they bring to the culture negatively. But if you say we're going to work very hard to have language that allows us to know who's needed in the moment and what we know that they're capable of and how to activate them when it's time and how to watch against those tendencies to go dark. Now that we've got a flow of work from start to finish, and I know where you fit and I know when you hand off, we can go through anything together positively and generate great excitement around the mission actually being fulfilled, the vision realized, and the work done. And everybody had a strategic part and nobody was left out. It's just what the moment called for, who the moment called for, and when.
Yeah. I love that, and what I love about it is at the end of the day, it depersonalizes things.
Yeah.
It helps you when you see a tool like this, you start to see that, "Oh, that person wasn't attacking me," or
Hmm.
that wasn't just trying to shoot down my idea, that person was just operating with how God had made them, and you shift that mentality in a team, you just start to see the synergy and the unity and coming together and how can we work through this and then you start to once you realize their wiring you start to know when to back off a little bit or like you're saying what does the moment call for you know
Totally.
visionary leader who just casted some amazing vision and he's going for if I'm the banker you know what this moment it might call for me to just get in that merchant bucket a little bit and let this
Yeah.
flesh out the idea is that kind of the right way to think about that.
It is. It is. There's two real practical approaches, and you just mentioned one. One of them is for me to shift into the mindset of what I do possess in that area, so I can participate meaningfully rather than make the moment about myself. That should seem obvious, right? But it's not. We see from our own line of sight. The other side to that is, and this is accentuated by my diminished capacity in this area. When it's time for this conversation right here about structure and resources, the best gift I give to my team is a closed mouth. That's it's not my moment. I don't have anything to offer. In fact, if you look down here, maybe just a word about this, you see these bar graphs down here just looking green and left. This actually tells you how much of that energy you actually have to contribute. Look at that banker score. I have, even though my number's a 7, because it's so painfully low and all my other energy is distributed in other places, 0. I've got 0 to offer. Or when it comes to the problem solving, I got 4%. The algorithm that we use tells us that's 38 minutes and 30 seconds of really slow slog of trying to walk up the down escalator, if you want a metaphor, of solving the problems. So what that means is that when we're in a problem solving moment, you know what I'm going to feel? Instant friction. It's going to be a lot harder for me than it is somebody else for whom it's very easy. And so if I'm trying to either insert myself to make everybody go at my slow pace, or worse, force it back into a vision conversation because that's where I'm comfortable, I've just taken the moment and made it about me and taken us out of the flow of work to get from start to finish because I'm super comfortable at this 85% of my vision casting, life giving, relationship building, team nurturing me. And if I'm the most dominant leader in the room, guess what we spend all our time on until I run out of energy in that. And that's not loving to the team. So here's a super hack we give is if you look at your job, the question you want to ask is how much of my job, if I were to break down all the details of my job description into bullet points, what percentage of time actually is required and what percentage of my energy, and here's what we measure, what percentage of my energy do I have to fit? And if that's a match, awesome. I'm going to feel like I'm robbing you to get a paycheck. If it's a mismatch, Keep me away from sharp objects and cliff edges because I'm probably not going to last in this life or in this organization much longer. I just don't have the capacity. We actually have teams audit their week and we say, look at the amount of time you spent on what kind of activity and does it match the proportion of your hardwired percentage? If it doesn't, you're probably in the wrong job or that was a bad week. You want to get your activity aligned with your identity because we're going to deliver who we are through what we do. This is our identity. But you can see the frustration on a team where somebody goes, I hate doing this part, or I refuse to do that part and now everybody's suffering, or I want to make it about the part I'm comfortable with when that's actually taking us backwards. So many practical uses of just knowing who my team is and what they possess. And when they tap out, 38 minutes, I'm done. I got nothing left to offer. And it's going to be, if I make it extend, it's going to be painful and miserable for everybody else.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing you saying as a practical application too is just the discipline of your calendar. Like, in
Mhm.
order for you to operate in the best version of your hardwiring, you have to say no to some things that you need to save that capacity for. I mean, that's what I'm hearing you saying is when you start to get a snapshot of this and who your team is and who you are in this, it shifts how you spend your time and what you spend your
Totally.
time on, and that ultimately will, I think, help you from going dark and make you, the best version of this. um, putting myself in, the seat of like a search team
Mhm.
or, a leader or leadership who's hiring and looking for, a staff position or talking with candidates, like using this grid here, depending on how that candidate is wired, what are some maybe best practice questions that you could ask? If let's just take yours for instance, if you're a 30 merchant, you people person is what I think about, high vision, but low banker, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker for that particular culture, but what are questions you could get at to help draw out some of these other scores and to maybe ensure that, the person isn't dark, to use that.
Yeah, there's several questions in there. Let me start with some of the more low hanging fruit, obvious ones when we use this tool. One is we try to decide in advance what the optimal hardwiring is for that particular job. I have seen most organizations create a job description that is a premeditated disappointment
Right. I see all the
because
I
all
always
the
say
time.
the only person that can fulfill this job is sitting at the right hand of the Father right now.
And he's not applying for this job. That's right. Exactly right. Well, so yeah, what ends up happening is we say, I want a visionary leader who's got a phenomenal stage presence, is life giving, someone who's trustworthy. People feel like they have a shepherd, but I also want someone who's good at counseling and a good problem solver and who can get layered in the complexity of building systems, but somebody who's got the capacity to oversee a large church and large teams and have experience getting big projects to completion, but somebody who also is a financial wizard who can oversee the budgets. And I'm like, well, you want somebody who doesn't exist, or like you said, who's at the right hand of the Father, or you want somebody, and this person does exist, who is almost a perfect balance square. And there's 17 people in the world that we know of that have that perfect balanced square, by the way.
Wow.
Seven of them I know personally.
My wife
Um,
is almost there.
that's right. That's exactly
They're
right.
almost perfect.
That's yeah, that's right. Tell her your babies, you're as close to perfect as they come.
She's
Um,
perfect in my eyes.
exactly. But what ends up happening if you get the perfect square, they don't have any one capacity to any extreme, and they will bring down and shrink what they do to the size of their capacity. And so one of the things that organizations often do is a sloppy job on the front end of the job description where they don't truly calibrate what's needed. So we have a tool where we actually give you the building blocks for hardwiring in advance, and it's a forced sort. You drop them into what's critical, what's helpful, what's optional, and what's non-essential. And I'll tell you, Todd, every time I've done it, 100% of the time, when we give a senior leadership the opportunity to do that exercise, it's a drag and drop gamified system system. You drag it and you drop everything in the critical pile. They have to be everything. And I'm like, awesome, that's great. Pick 9. And you have to distribute it across the board. They're like, wait, no, I can't do that. This has to be, must be. I'm like, sorry, nobody has unlimited capacity. And so kind of bitterly and begrudgingly, they'll drag and drop and they'll do something magical. They'll take something that was in the critical box and they'll drop it in the non-essential box. And I'll say, what did you just do? And they said, well, you told me I couldn't have it. I said, no, a minute ago you were fighting me and told me you had to have it. Now it doesn't matter. What they did is they fine tuned based on what the hardwiring of that person needs to be: personality, intellect, skills, software, whatever. That's separate. Use a different tool for that. But we actually give you the tools in advance to then say, once we're done and we're done collaborating, you push a button, it spits out a CVI graphic and it shows you who you have. And it also shows you the areas of agreement or disagreement on your team. The CEO might have a view of what that person should be, but the people who work every day with that individual might have a different view. You can also draw attention to that and highlight, we need to tighten up even firmer because the person signing the checks doesn't agree with the person in the trenches. And so it really allows you to serve that person well. And once you do that for the first critical positions, now you stop not only looking at the individual in the role, you start looking for what do we have and we not have on the team. So there is an optimal pattern, and we have found it, and I can send it to you, but we have found what the optimal hardwiring is for every major position in every typical organization. We can tell you what the best top performers are and how they're wired. Now, again, you're factoring other things, but how they're wired, you can actually see that and compare it to any potential candidate. But what's best is if you can look at your own unique company and your own unique deliverables and say, this is what we know we need for this role. Then you look at any final round of candidates up against that. And then what we recommend is you create the order of interviews. You could say yes to any of them, but you create the order of interviews and the priority of the person who most closely matches that hardwiring. And here's the rub. If you choose a person that's completely opposite or on the other side of what you said you knew you needed as a team, you're going to get exactly what you deserve. You're going to get somebody who is going to be struggling in that position and who's not going to last there very long at all. They're going to be frustrated. You know why? Because most people on the hiring side make a decision based on chemistry. Do I like you? And are you teachable? If I sense you're teachable, I'll give you the skills. If I like you, it's not going to stink working with you. I'll take the chance.
Right.
Versus, I need you. And even if it's hard for me to know how to work with you because you're wired so different than me, I depend on you because you're exactly who we need, not who I am. So that's a huge preventative that we give. Now, just to go one level further out of risk of over talking, I just want to say, you asked what kinds of questions about going dark. One of the things that we do is we structure the interviews for people in a way that's consistent with their hardwiring. So, for example, with the builder, I'll say to the builder, okay, here are a series of rapid fire questions I'm going to ask you, and I want you to react with your gut. Tell me, what do you believe the decision is? I don't want you to tell me a story and narrate it. I don't want you to ask me a bunch of questions. I'm going to give you enough information that I just want to know, what's your gut say? Yes or no, this or that, and rapid fire, boom, 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 boom. I can see, and it's got to be real to the organization, right? Something that they would actually do in their job. I can see right now if they are the mature expression or not. For an innovator, and this is an example that we've found that's really been kind of revealing. We give an innovator, because innovators are independent thinkers and they're logical sequential processors, and they don't respond quickly in an interview to rapid fire questions. They need to take it apart. They need to understand it. They need to be able to put it back together and do that without you in their head and without some premature push. So we actually do interviews with innovators by saying, okay, here is a paragraph with a real to life problem that you would be expected to solve in our organization if we were to hire you. Now, we believe this is consistent with what you said in your resume you're able to do, and this isn't too hard where the answer isn't, you don't require something outside of this paragraph to come up with the answer. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you this room with us out of your head, and we're going to let you take as long as you need to be able to process through this And when you have figured it out, come out and tell us, and then walk us through your solution. Well, that's honoring the core value of the person, because that's how they're wired. But if they come out and they're like, this paragraph didn't have this, this is stupid, this is dumb, and they're finding fault and they're complaining or they're blame shifting, well, that tells us we don't have a mature expression of that person. They're not going to be a fit for us in that area. We're looking for humility. We're looking for teachability. We're looking for someone who actually can do what we know they're capable of rather than just what they want us to think that they can do. So those are some of the examples on the front end that we use. By the way, we have about 10 diagnostic questions that we give every interviewer in terms of categories for each of the core values to surface what's really on the inside, if that's a mature expression of that person or not.
Right. Well, and one of the things early on when I was introduced to this that was so insightful is at the end of the day, to have the best team, you need to be represented in all four quadrants.
Right.
And not every person is going to have all four quadrants, except for those 17 people in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Even those people, though, are limited in each quadrant because they
Yeah.
won't the extremes, right? I've been working with a church who, you can almost pinpoint the church's CVI, right?
Hmm.
High banker. We're going to be slow to make decisions. We're going to consult with everybody on staff first. Let's get all the data. Oh, no, we need another meeting for that. Like it's built into their culture. And so, what would you say to, churches like that who are vetting candidates who, if the candidate was wired, say more of a banker, they obviously would fit into that, but maybe they actually don't need a banker because they got a million of them already. Like you would just speak to a little bit of like the balancing aspect of this and how, depending on the culture, I think we can tend to skew towards, we're only going to value this, but what's the
Right.
valuing all of it and how can that benefit a team?
Yeah, the answer's in your question. I'll just add some shade to it. You're exactly right. The organization does require, and the ideal scenario was that everybody on the teams are a together composite of all four, because the work you're going to do does require vision and strategy and structure and action. So you're going to need all four. Now, again, we're not measuring spiritual gifts. That's a different conversation in ministry. So I just want to separate those. That's what God gives you the moment you believe. But when it comes to an organization, and I'll even raise you one, when it comes to a transition, when you have one senior leader who's dominant in a certain area who leaves and then goes, and then you get a different leader in that position, the organization and its culture shifts big time. Look at mine, for example. The culture of my church, look at the size of my merchant, is going to be highly loving, highly relational, highly engaging. And by default, you know who I'm going to attract? People that are just like me. People who, when they sit and listen to me, the way that I make them feel, the way that they think about relationships and God and what could be in their Christian life, we will be dominantly a highly inspiring kind of church. One of the things that we've done in some of our church studies, and this is fascinating, is that people that have the lead pastor who's big merchant, that's exactly what they are. They're friendly. People that have builders as their lead pastor, they have massive churches. It doesn't matter what their theology is. It doesn't matter if they're urban or rural. It doesn't matter any of those external factors, if they've been trained or not. If you have a big builder, you're going to have a big church. If you have a little builder, you're going to have a little church. And in a situation like mine, I'm gonna go from love to act, from vision to action, from love to power. So I'm going to try to take the vision of what God gives us in his word. And I'm going to try to enlarge upon that so that multiplies in our lives. So we all experience transformation and then we generate momentum through that. What I'm not particularly inclined to, but I have to pay attention to, is the infrastructure. I don't know who gives what. I have a team of people who look at our finances. I just try to turn in my receipts before the ink wears off. I don't have that infrastructure conversation. I don't know all the things that it takes. And so what tends to happen, and this is a constraint in my own leadership that I'm constantly attentive to, that I want to make sure that the stability of our organization is run really, really well by people who have a large capacity in this area, because I don't want to let that be a fatal flaw for me. But now flip it around. Let's say you have a strong knowledge base senior leader, and it's every Sunday is a deep exegetical dive into the text. You know who's going to attract? The same kind of people. He's going to attract bankers. He's going to attract people who love the knowledge and the data, who want deep dive in Greek words, and who want the practical, do it exactly this way kind of regulative principle of ministry dynamic. This is the way it's done. We don't do this. We sing the hymns. We exposit verses, and we're careful with our exegesis. When you look up at the builder, we're going to deal with like how many people can we get into heaven. Seeker sensitive churches tend to be more drawn towards that builder model because we want more people, more fruit. People down here are like, no, we want to be accurate in our theology. People over here tend to be more in the counseling side. Let's get into the nuances of difficulties and problems, and there's going to be a lot more take it apart, and everything's going to be very, very precise, and so the leadership will just by default show up and attract or repel a certain kind of person. Same thing in politics. I do work with state and local races on in the political space. When this kind of leader walks into a room, the people that are wired like him resonate. The people that aren't wired like them don't get it, and they don't get voted for. And so you see churches
Yeah.
beginning to gather and segment based on the leader's default hardwiring.
Right.
And when that happens, I as a pastor have to be mindful. When I'm preaching, I serve all. I got 4 different people listening to me. I have 4 different people. Somebody needs to know how this connects to their relationship with God and each other. The other person needs to know, how does this affect the problems that I'm struggling to overcome? This one is, how do I live in the infrastructure of day-to-day life in a way that's got a walk in rhythm that's pleasing to God? And how does this ultimately produce results? I have to speak in application to all those people in a way that they understand. So this has become a powerful communication tool for me.
Yeah.
But then one last thing is if I leave, and let's say we bring in a big banker, because one of the things that I do and I'm highly convinced of is because the Bible is the place of knowledge with power, I have to be faithful to the text and bring the word of God. So I will tend to attract the banker knowledge based people who don't always join me in the vision side of things. But let's say I leave or I get hit by a bus and a banker comes in. Those people are going to love that. But these people are going to go, wait a minute. Where'd
Mm.
the vision go? And these people going, we're just going to do what we've always done because that's what's being faithful. And these people going, well, what's next for us? And well, what's next for us is what we've always done. And now you're going to see a shift in culture.
Right.
So the shift in culture will always follow the most dominant or ominous
Right.
leader,
Right.
which is why you have to choose wisely based on what's needed for that position.
Right. Well, and I think too, one of the dangers I think people can get in is just because their proclivity is to something different that's
Right.
informing how they do
Right.
things. They start to label it as this is right and that over there is wrong,
Yes.
instead of
Yes.
we're just wired a little bit differently. They're doing ministry too, but they're wired it differently. They're just doing it different. And again, that's why I love the realization of what this does. This is super helpful, Justin. I think as we kind of land the plane here, I want to kind of put you on the spot here. Just ask you 2 questions. We got a lot of pastors and leaders probably watching this, and then we have a lot of candidates who are looking for jobs watching this. With everything you unpacked over the last hour, what would be like one action step maybe for a church leader who's now taking this all in and trying to figure out, well, how can I take a first step into assessing my culture better or myself better, just being more aware. So what would you say to the church leader? Kind of, what could I take away from this? It's just one actionable step. And then part two would
Yeah.
be, I'll just ask them both, and then I'll let you answer. But part two would be on the candidate side, who's you know talking with potential employers and churches. How can they help draw out the kind of culture that that place would be, and how they can fit into that and learn about themselves? So, what would you say to the church leader? What would you say to the candidate?
Yeah, the answer is probably one and the same. I would say to them both, You need to find out what kind of leader you are. See, every person that we've just described is a leader. It's just what kind of leader are you? There's so many expectations on pastors in leadership, to know who you are, because to be a leader is to study leadership. And to study leadership, you want to get the right people doing the right thing at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason. This tool can actually help you do that. That's what's so helpful for me is number one, to be content with who God's made me to be. But also to honor who God has brought around me so that I lift them to their highest and best. I'm a steward of the people that God's entrusted to me, and I'm a steward of what gifts and capacities he's given to me. So number one, I want to give myself to my highest and best. And that's really about my identity. It's not about my assignment. And I think that's an important word for pastors to hear. There's a difference between your calling and your current assignment. An assignment might be a short-lived thing in this place to do this thing. It could be like Joseph. You have a series of little things that you're doing, all of which are an expression of your calling, and a person's calling might be different than yours, and God has uniquely fitted you for your calling, but your assignment is not your calling. Your assignment is not your identity. So if this helps you understand what it is to actually live out your design by God. Now, again, spiritual gifts is a different conversation. Have that conversation. You're going to use those, but they're not separate from who God made you to be. So I would say to the pastor, I've talked to so many pastors who got clarity about this and they were ready to leave their ministry, and they got reinvigorated and have stayed and be fruitful in their ministry because they found themselves bumping their head or not sure how to figure out this muddy in the middle thing that exists between them and their team. And this gives them clarity. It's also given certain guys a clarity to go, well, then clearly in the wrong role. Well, okay, well, then you need to wisely steward who you're going to pass on this ministry to, because even though you're no longer a part of it, it's still God's work. So be careful. But even in that, to say, well, then what kind of step do I need to take going forward? So that's one thing I would say to the pastor. The other thing I would say to the search team or the hiring side is the same kind of thing. Is have you carefully considered you have First Timothy 3 and the requirements of God's word, you have Titus 1, you have the scriptures that speak to character and doctrinal soundness and all of that. But if you're going to bring somebody in, you want to optimize and steward what they have as well. You don't want to ask them to be what they never will be. You don't want to put expectations on them that they can never meet, and you want to give them freedom to build their team in such a way that they could actually truly leverage their highest and best while lifting others to theirs. So, as a practical takeaway, Todd, I'll do this. I hadn't planned to do this, but I'm feeling up for it. Anybody who watches this, who reaches out back to you, connect them to our team. We'll underwrite a CVI for them to take with no cost. If they relate to what we just said, if they're saying, listen, I would love to know if I'm a fit. I would love to know if I belong here. I'm trying to get clarity between my identity and my activity, my calling and my assignment. I would like this. I'll personally underwrite that and have one of our staff do a virtual debrief with them to give them an answer to that question. Because ultimately this is about the kingdom. And there are too many people who are too unclear and unsure and who are bouncing away from opportunities where they could have stayed and made a difference. And now some of them are not even in ministry anymore. And to say, if you want to know who God's made you to be, it's not geography. It's not where you are. It's who you are. We can give you that level of clarity, and I'll debrief that with one of the staff. If you have a church that wants to look at a candidate and kind of even optimize what that would be, we'd give them one free calibration that would allow them to say they can collaborate together to say this is the kind of leader that we agree that we want, and I'll do that for only your audience, okay? Only for the people that subscribe to the Rukes Group. So that's just my gift to them, but also to you as my friend.
I appreciate that. We'll include that in the notes for sure. And then where else can people, find out more information just about what you're doing, and where can they find
Yeah.
you? and things like that.
Yeah, hardwiredcoaching.com is probably the easiest thing to find out who we are from a hardwiring standpoint with regard to this tool. Desert Bible Church is what we're doing in the context of ministry, but I'm a kingdom guy. I just want to see God's people flourish, and I'll just be honest with you. My I just turned 51. My end game, my single metric that I'm using right now in my life personally and for everybody I mentor and shape is I want them to have kingdom impact in their sphere. However large or small that sphere is, I want them to have ultimate kingdom impact. Most people aren't even sure what their spiritual gifts are. Some people confuse hardwiring with spiritual gifts. Some
Mm.
people would love some clarity to kind of have like handlebars to ride this bike to know where do I get started. We would love to see people actually sent in the direction with our encouragement and support into whatever God has for them. So whatever it takes for us to have kingdom impact in our sphere, I'm willing to put my shoulder behind and help.
I love that. Justin, this has been super helpful. I think the biggest takeaway for me and maybe for some of our listeners is, what does the moment call for? And you're going to have various capacities and you're going to be stronger in some and you're going to be weaker in others. But if I were to just leave one takeaway for people, it would be what does the moment call for with any given situation that you're in? I think that's super insightful. This is good.
Amen.
We'll have to do this again sometime.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to jump on and talk about it, man. And I appreciate you and all that you're doing.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for your partnership. Thanks, Justin.
Absolutely. God bless, man. Take care.